Hey everybody, Aaron Count, Sage Dynamics, and this is my review of the Vortex Defender ST. As some of you know, and if not, I'm telling you right now, I am pretty much 100% Patreon exclusive. So this video was already previously seen by my Patreons, as well as 99% of the videos I make. They'll never make it here to YouTube. I'm only putting out about one YouTube video a month. If you are interested in supporting me on Patreon, I would definitely appreciate that. Not only are you going to get more video content, you're going to see videos like this before they make it to YouTube, as well as videos that never make it to YouTube. And you have the opportunity to interact in the community, the Patreon community, and shoot in, if you want to, shoot in the monthly drill challenge that I do, as well as have an opinion on things that get reviewed or things that get talked about, videos that you want to see, so on and so forth. So if you'd like to become a supporter, there's multiple tiers over there. You can head on over to Patreon /Sage Dynamics and check it out. Or you can just hang out and get the occasional YouTube video, and that's cool too. So without further delay, here's my review of the Vortex Defender ST. Kind of gave you guys an initial impression on this particular optic, which I've had quite a while. They sent me an engineering copy, like I said in that video, back in 2022. And then, of course, in the midst of COVID and everything like that, I think that was one of the reasons it delayed making it out. The first of this line that they released was a Defender CCW, which initially met with some criticism because of the refresh rate, which is something that they then made an in-production change in, and they did the same thing with the ST and with the XL, which is an optic I'll be getting a review to you guys on in the future. My original, this is the engineering copy. This has got thousands and thousands of rounds and thousands, well, not thousands, dozens of drops on it throughout the testing phase. Basically what it happens is they send me something, and I have this kind of relationship with a few optic companies. They'll send me an engineering version or a pre-production or prototype version, if you will, and just ask me to give my thoughts, my opinions, and of course I'm not just going to stare at it and do that. I'm going to take it out to the range. I'm actually going to use it, which is why I always request one that can handle that. Don't just send me like the body or a fragile version that isn't potted or anything like that. So I got a lot of rounds on the initial version, and having the version they sent me and then the production version side by side, I can tell you there are some definitive differences, the biggest one being that refresh rate. I haven't gotten a hard, specific answer from Vortex on it, but I have been told it's in the 60 hertz range. But I didn't get a specific number, either because they didn't know, or they didn't want that information necessarily out there for whatever proprietary reason. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but you put both of them side by side, and it's not something I can really show you on camera because of frame rate on cameras, because frame rate in the camera and the frame rate in the eye are two totally different things. There's a definitive difference between the refresh rate, the blinking or the dashing or the flickering that you see on some optics that have lower refresh rates. So right out of the gate, we've got that higher refresh rate, and we've got an open emitter optic that is a top load battery. This particular one has the Delta Point Pro or the Sig Pro footprint, with either a 3 or a 6 MOA dot, 10 brightness settings, the last two being night vision, which of course we'll get to. And they're marketing it for general use, hobby, competition shooting, self-defense, and mounting on things like shotguns or as an off-axis or even a main optic on a rifle. There is a polymer insert on top of the shroud which helps absorb shock, and a 7075 aluminum body. It's got aggressive texturing on the front of the shroud for manipulating the optic off of things, which is a nice touch, not necessarily necessary. But it is kind of cool that they put that up there and they were thinking ahead, because that's something that people do if they have to do. Battery compartment is water sealed, and you've got an auto off feature, 10 minutes, pick it up, shake awake, if you will, to reactivate the optic and preserve battery life when it's not in use. Buttons are huge, but they are nice and recessed. They do have kind of a protective barrier or a perimeter, if you will. Then the word I'm looking for escapes me. Up on the left, down on the right, easy adjustments. The one thing that is problematic right out of the gate with this optic is changing the battery. They provide a special wrench, which does help, but it's still, and this is a plague of top load batteries when it comes to open emitters, is making the footprint reasonable and not having to go to a totally new footprint, because the Delta Point Pro footprint is one of the larger ones out there for open emitters, but it's still difficult based on the shroud depth to get in there and change that battery. It's not impossible, but it is an exercise in patience. So when you put the battery in it for the first time, you're definitely going to realize that. And as far as the general use of the optic, like I said, I've had that engineering version for years now, but I didn't want to do a review on it because it's not what actually went into production. Even if the only thing that changed is the LED, the reticle refresh rate, I still wanted to do a review on what's being released. So I could talk about the other one and I'll show you guys a little bit of that testing that I did 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago now. But we're focusing on the one that I got in for production, so that's part of production. So a 2,000 round review on that. Getting into it, getting it mounted. I mounted it on my SIG P320 Legion. You guys see this gun pop up quite a bit because I do like it, and I'm actually trying to see how many rounds I can go on this gun before I start breaking parts, just to see what the longevity is on P320. That's kind of beside the point, but you'll probably see a video on that in the future because I use this particular gun for as many reviews as possible. Mounting, no big deal. Getting it zeroed, no big deal. The body height is a little bit higher than previous generations of open emitters, so your suppressor height sights might not necessarily work directly with it, depending on what you have. And I can't quote specifically what height you're going to need because your gun may be different from mine, probably is. So an MOS versus a P320 versus a Canic versus an HK, the answer to what height sights I need is going to be different based on the depth of the footprint, any kind of adapter plate, and whatever else you put in there. But once you get it mounted, get it zeroed, I went with the 3 MOA dot. They sent me a 306. I'm not really interested in the 6 for a handgun, even though perfectly reasonable dot size for some, and some people prefer the bigger dot. I don't. So I went with the 3. My gripe is I wish they made a smaller option, like a 1. I do like 1. I like that Trijicon provides a 1, but Vortex doesn't. So 3 MOA is what I'm going with, which is a pretty reasonable size. You see it from a lot of different manufacturers. It's not atypical. Window clarity is fantastic. There is a slightly noticeable bluish tint for a notch filter, but the window is very distortion free. You're not really getting any kind of coalescing or collapsing of imagery at the edge of the windows like you do distortion causing manipulation or well, distortion is probably the best word. Let's just go with that. Distortion at the edges where it just kind of confounds your visual process. So just right out of the box, mounted that first 500 rounds, I wasn't identifying any issues that I hadn't already noticed with the previous generation. And one big advantage to it was, or I shouldn't say previous generation, the engineering version that they sent me. The big advantage was there was a noticeable improvement in that refresh rate. So rapidly transitioning from target to target, and I'll be honest with you, that's usually the only time I notice refresh rate. And there was a time, and it wasn't that long ago, where people would defend optics like the Leupold LCO, rifle optic, which has since been discontinued. 1 MOA dot, fantastic, huge window, but had terrible refresh rate. And guys would defend it because it was a Leupold. They're like, oh, well, refresh rate's not a big deal, whatever. And then suddenly the internet became aware of refresh rate because it wasn't really a thing that was talked about 2-3 years ago. And then it became like this fixation that people had. And I think some people repeat it without even really understanding what they're talking about. They just hear it and they're like, oh, I heard it has a bad refresh rate. And I'm like, what does that mean to you? Don't get me wrong, refresh rate is very important, but you have to understand what kind of negatives can come from a low refresh rate. And refresh rate, of course, is a term that we all just agreed that we're going to use. When transitioning from target to target, you notice a flicker. It doesn't keep you from getting a sight picture, but it is something noticeable and something we don't want. Now, usually these lower refresh rates help extend battery life because it's a pulse. And the less pulses you have, the longer the battery life lasts over a longer period of time. You can also save money by buying more inexpensive LEDs that have lower refresh rates. That's something Vortex may have been thinking about in the beginning, but as far as the MSRP on this optic goes, with the refresh rate that you get, you definitely do not notice that flickering, or I wasn't noticing that flickering when transitioning to target, changing focal depths, things like that. So definitely an improvement over the engineering version I got, which has that lower refresh rate, and you really do notice it if you're rapidly transitioning between points of aim, even going chest to head, head to chest, or from a target to the left to target to the right, or you're shooting steel in a line or whatever. It is some kind of segmenting and perforation that you're going to notice. So, huge improvement there. That first 500 rounds is just kind of that get to know you phase. Then I do my first drop, and then I start really pushing into it that next 1,500 rounds. With optics, there's really not a lot to gain from just mindlessly shooting 2,000 rounds. So I try to put the optic in as many situations that I can. Low light, night vision, bad weather. If it's going to rain, I'm going to head up to the range, especially being an open emitter. If it's going to get foggy, if it's going to be super humid, these are things that I want to run the optic through when possible, when weather is inclement and it's being... it volunteers itself to help me test these things. So I ran the ST in as many varied conditions as I can, took it on the road with me to a couple of classes, and it just becomes an optic. And that's probably the best thing that you can say about it in regards to that is you stop noticing that you're kind of using this specific optic. You're just using a good red dot at that point. Like once, I'd say probably after, specifically probably after that first 1,000 rounds, I really stopped paying attention to anything unless something went wrong, and nothing did. In that first 1,000 rounds, I didn't see any issues. I didn't notice anything. Dot clarity was fantastic. Refresh rate was there. The controls were intuitive. The brightness settings are fantastic. One thing it doesn't have that a lot of these newer generation of optics are starting to have is that really intuitive auto adjust. There's no auto adjust feature whatsoever. So it's manual only, which I think some people are going to appreciate. I don't mind it at all. Generally, what I do for my brightness settings is I will pick a very nice white wall. I'll usually stand about 7 yards off of it, and I'll turn on my weapon light, and I'll adjust my brightness to where I can just barely see that reticle, because that's reasonable. And that's my brightness setting, and I just leave it there. And I've done this for years. When I carried an RMR Type 2 on duty, I would turn off the auto adjust feature. When possible. RMR Type 1, it was a lot easier. RMR Type 2, you had to make that adjustment every 16 hours as it went back to refresh mode. But other optics I've carried, like an acro or an EPS or an MPS, you just set your brightness setting and you just forget about it. And that's something you kind of had to do until intuitive auto adjust came along. So this optic isn't necessarily late to the game so much as it's not providing features that are necessarily going to cost you more money that you might not necessarily use. So I think some people, and I can appreciate this, they want every optic to have every feature that every other optic does. And then it just becomes an issue of brand loyalty. Which brand are you going to buy? If they're all the same, you're just picking a logo. And that's fine, but if you take away some of those features that you're not necessarily going to use, you can save some money, which is why Vortex has finally entered the game with an optic that is durable and reliable for duty use. You guys saw the video I did on the Defender CCW. Getting into the ST and running it through a review, I'm seeing very similar performance in regards to durability as well as usefulness, efficiency, accuracy of the optic itself. That 3 MOA dot is very crisp to my eye, may be different for you. Astigmatisms and eye conditions are definitely going to change things there. And I was able to use it in any condition that I was shooting it in. Low light, it's not a problem at all. Again, a lot of factors that go into that, like the light brightness and the ambient lighting and things like that, and what you're realistically trying to accomplish. Under night vision, and I've talked about this in videos before, I do not use night vision settings unless I'm testing them. And my main reason for that is, what if I have to go to night vision and turn on a white light, and then I have to stop and make an adjustment on my optic to get out of the night vision mode, and I don't want to do that. So because night vision just amplifies available light, I just run the available setting, and it does end up giving me a brighter halo and a brighter dot, but I can still shoot with it, especially if I'm pushing IR light down range from a weapon light. So in all the varied conditions I shot this thing in, I didn't notice anything. It was just kind of boring. It just became reliable, and it was dependable. And every single time I got a sight picture and I pulled the trigger, I got what I wanted, as long as my fundamentals were on point. And I wasn't identifying any issues about it that stood out that made me not like the features or not like the performance. And once I got in the last 500 rounds, it was just boringly reliable. I, at that point, had used it for single-handed manipulation, of course, done the drop test, which we'll get to. I had run this thing in every conceivable way possible, and it just continued to perform. So it brought me to that last 500 rounds. Drop test, that's one thing that a lot of people are focused on. That's been kind of my litmus test. Not the only factor that I account for, but it is one of them. I'm going to drop this thing every 500 rounds to see if it can handle a sudden shock. It isn't necessarily assuming people are going to drop their guns, even though they do. It's just to see if the optic can take a hard hit. So every 500 rounds I drop that optic, which is a little extreme. I consider being like, what if I just do a drop test every 1,000 rounds? But I'm going to stick with the drop every 500 because, well, I can. So first thing I want to show you guys is my zero confirmation group before we get to these drops. This was a group I fired 25 yards after zeroing the gun for video, 5 rounds, 124 grain gold dot, bench rest supported, 25 yards. And then, of course, your drops every 500 rounds, a shoulder height drop test. See if it would cause any breakage or loss of zero or anything like that. So here are your drops. And then finally, the moment of truth as far as the internals and the zero and everything is concerned, another 5-round group, 124 grain gold dot, fired at 25 yards, bench rest supported. And I'd call that zero maintained. And not only that, no lens breakage, no lens cracks. I've got nothing going on with this very generously sized window. It's just boringly reliable. It's not as sexy as some of the other open emitter optics that have come out recently. It doesn't have the same features, but you're going to be able to afford it a lot easier than some of these other optics. And I think, and this isn't me trying to get you to get away from those other optics, it's just kind of providing some context or a change of premise, if you will, to think about why this versus that. And I'm not even going to compare it to another optic. I'm just going to say, in your mind, you can think of them right now. A lot of people are kind of steering away from open emitters, and I can definitely appreciate that, but I just don't. It just doesn't bother me to the same degree that it bothers some other people. I don't always have to grab the latest and greatest if what I'm using works well. It doesn't mean I'm not going to consider, like, hey, is this going to do what I need to do better? Because arguably a closed emitter would perform better than this in the fact that it can't have certain malfunctions that this optic can have. But your needs may vary for concealed carry, even for duty use. There's nothing wrong with an open emitter. You just have to be aware that you have to be more careful with it in regards to keeping stuff from getting in it. And that's really the biggest difference. Enclosed emitters preclude you introducing mud or blood or mustard or mayonnaise into the optic itself. But that's pretty much the only advantage. They can both fog up, they can both break, they can both have battery issues, and they can both have flickering issues and reticle issues and mounting issues and things like that. So there's only that one difference. That doesn't mean that the Vortex is the best open emitter out there, but it is a good contender, and it's definitely improvement over the previous generation of Vortex optics, which is what I was hoping for. And they released this line, CCW, and then the ST, and now the XL. And the XL is another optic I had, and I'll be doing a video on that, like I said, in the future. And it really does show that Vortex paid attention to what people were complaining about with the Venom and the Viper line. And this is an in-house optic as far as design, manufactured in the Philippines. I believe primarily in the Philippines. There are some other components that probably come from other places. I don't know the source of the glass. I don't know if it's Japanese glass or if it's Korean glass. I don't know where the glass is coming from. Kind of irrelevant to me. So if you are a little bit more particular about what you buy as far as where it's from, that gives you an idea of the source. And of course it says right there on the bottom of the optic where it's made. Of course it doesn't give you a full list of components, like I said, but you're going to have primary source manufacturer. And for the price point, I mean, MSRP versus what the actual street price is going to be significantly different. I've already seen these for like mid 300s, which is comparable or comparable to what you were seeing for Venoms and Vipers 5 years ago. And extreme difference between these optics, not only in glass window size and glass clarity, but also in durability, features, battery life, so on and so forth. So the Vortex optic is now, when it comes to their red dots for handguns, definitely a contender for consideration when it comes to defensive carry or even duty use. I think this is a fantastic optic. I think that there's room for improvement. Having an auto adjust feature should be something they'll probably be thinking about in the future. And I wouldn't expect it would be too long before we see an enclosed emitter option from them. Right now, what we're seeing with a lot of companies is they're just rebranding the same optic. They're all purchasing the Siley Bear, which is the Swamp Froch Kraken, which is the Adaball STD, which is the C&H Duty, and they're just putting their name on it. I think Griffin Armin offers it too, as some, whatever their name is. Whereas companies like Vortex could have very easily done that, and instead they decided to go a different direction and make a brand new optic. And I can appreciate that, because when it comes to the optics that are available, we are racing towards zero. And Vortex, instead of just rebranding something else, decided to produce their own optic. And I can definitely appreciate that. So if you're interested in the ST as far as its durability and its effectiveness, it's a fantastic optic. It's got a very generous window, a really clean reticle, good battery life, good brightness settings, and it's going to give you the performance that you would expect, plus a little from an optic that you would choose for self-defense or duty use. Night vision compatible. You can beat on this thing pretty good within the realm of realism, as you guys have seen, and it's going to perform as you would hope that it would perform. And it's definitely, it's not even the same company when it comes to pistol optics. You can't really compare this thing to the Venom and the Viper. Those things were toys. They belonged to Nerf guns. But this is a serious, rugged, duty, self-defense, competition use optic that I think you'll appreciate with a good footprint. You don't have to take it off the gun to change the battery. And I think it's definitely going to be something that should be on your short list of optics to consider if you are looking for a reasonably priced open emitter that can handle the rigors of everyday life, be it personal defense or duty carry. Till next time, Patrons, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, train accordingly.